Alright, you guys asked for it. Today we're going to cover everything about one of the worst releases to date with Cabrakan, destroyer of, well, nothing at launch. If you do enjoy and learn something from this video, then drop a like before you leave, and of course subscribe for more god histories and everything Smite on the channel in the future. Alright, so let's get into Release Cabrakan. So I think his 1 is a good place to start, given it was probably his weakest ability at launch. Yes, you could still do stupid shit like Polynomicon and Soul Reaver one-shotting people, but other than that, this ability was hot garbage at release. So the damage on the ability was pretty mediocre, especially going into the late game. Since Cab was meant to be this sort of in-your-face, warrior-like guardian, you would expect damage numbers on the level of like a Hercules or something, but no. 275 base and 50% scaling isn't release Ravenant level of bad, but in general it was quite weak. But the big thing missing from this wall of text is the haste effect. That makes you immune to auto-attack movement penalties for those who don't know. Yeah, on release he didn't even have haste on his 1 and would move much slower while he was trying to auto-attack in it. So if he was running at someone trying to engage and he missed his first auto-attack after using this, you can kiss your life goodbye as you just used all your movement and half your CC for no payoff. And even if you did manage to hit the ability correctly, the payoff wasn't even that good. A 1 second stun that was probably DR'd down to 0.67 seconds anyway was just way too weak. Especially when you consider it can only hit a single target. Oh, and if all of that didn't convince you this ability sucked, it had a base 18 second cooldown. Don't ask why, I don't know, but apparently Hi-Res thought this ability would be mad OP or something and had just put it on 18 seconds flat cooldown. So Cabrakan's 2 was much of the same really. Damage was too low to be considered for any real burst, and CC was too short to have any reliable follow-up on its control. So this ability only stunned for 1 second, same as his 1 at launch. So basically no matter which way you used his 2 stuns, they self-DR'd each other, so 1 was only 2/3 of a second, which may as well be nothing. His passive on this ability was also a bit different at release. Instead of gaining protections per stack, he lost them for some reason. This used to work somewhat like Celestial Legion Helm, in that he had protections out of combat and then lost them when he took damage in combat. Issue is, Legion Helm is designed for squishy mages who just need to survive like a big burst of damage, and after that they don't really care about having protections. So it kind of makes sense on a mage, but put that same effect on a tanky guardian, and in reality it was just frustrating to be super tanky going in and then suddenly get nuked from orbit when you lose all those protections within 5 seconds of trying to frontline. So Cab's 3 at launch was actually his strongest ability in my opinion, and it basically hasn't changed very much to present day. It still did way too much overall damage, however at release it had no time limit. So if you wanted to and had the mana for it, you could keep channeling tremors indefinitely instead of like the 10 seconds max that we have now. So that was pretty fun actually, and one of the few things that was strong about Release Cabrakan. But mostly for memeing rather than actual competitive use, since you really don't want to root yourself in place for more than 10 seconds anyway, because you make yourself such an easy target. So, Cabrakan ult. Yeah, this was a weird one for sure, and there was a lot of stuff that was just very nonsensical about this ability at launch. So for starters, obviously the targeter was fucked, and you often miss the ability simply because the damage didn't actually apply to the entire area, but more like a thin sliver down the middle. I'm sure anyone who's played Cabrakan until recently knows how this feels. But also, the walls he created had standard health instead of taking a certain number of auto-attack hits to die. Which means they could take ability damage, which means any mage could one-shot all 5 walls instantly come late game, which means this ability was absolutely fucking useless. Like early on it could maybe do some work, but once you got out of the early game, the walls died to 1 mage ability or 1 auto from a hunter. So given that half the time you missed the damage on the ult anyway, and most of the time the walls were useless, it begs the question what this ult even did for you besides looking cool. And one final note on Release Cabrakan. His passive, the 5% damage mitigations, didn't apply to himself at release, only to his other teammates. So that compounded with the weird protection loss on his 2 made him very squishy and almost impossible to fill that Guardian frontline role. That's probably why people still meme with him to this day with Polynomicon and full damage builds, to be honest. Alright, so that's Release Cabrakan. Let's move on and cover some of the many buffs he's needed over the years to bring him into playability after this shit show of a release. So in September 2014, only a few weeks after Cabrakan's initial release, some major buffs were thrown his way. So the weird protections interaction on his 2 was changed so that he gained them from taking damage instead of losing them. This bit of red text here is sort of misleading. He didn't actually lose any protections, they were just reworked so that he'd have them more when he needed them in combat rather than out of combat. This was a buff, not a nerf. And they also buffed the base damage of the ability later on to a fairly respectable 330. They actually buffed tremors as well this patch, which I thought was a little bit weird. This was definitely his strongest ability at launch, but maybe people just didn't see its potential back then, so the scaling was bumped up. An extra 10% magical power scaling might seem small, especially on a Guardian, but given you'll probably land at least 4 ticks of damage with this, it actually added up very quickly, making this ability one of the highest total damage abilities in the entire game. And they also changed the ultimate to what we have now, with it taking a specified number of auto attacks to kill instead of health, preventing mages from insta-clearing the walls and giving tanky gods some chance of clearing them as well. Also, I didn't even realise how bad the ult damage was before, Jesus. So yeah, they buffed this pretty majorly in this patch also, 50 damage extra at rank 1, scaling up to 200 extra damage at max rank. Pretty good I'd say, though it was still unreliable at this point with the targeter, so it didn't really matter all that much until they fixed that. Oh shit, I completely forgot about this one. So yeah, Release Cabrakan didn't even have the attack speed boost to help him land his 1 consistently. You're working off his base 1.1 or whatever attack speed. Well yeah, that was changed in the patch of October 1st, 2014, along with bumping up the stun on his 2 from 1 to 1.5 seconds as you rank it up. This was much needed given his tendency to self-DR his own CCs, making them shorter. They also reduced some post-fire delays, allowing him to do more stuff without having to wait for animations and the like to finish up. And about 7 months after his original release, Cabrakan finally got haste on his 1 on March 18th, 2015. Man, just imagining how bad this ability must have been at launch makes me cringe. No haste, regular attack speed, almost no damage, and only 1 second of CC. Man, this was terrible at launch. A few more patches came afterwards, buffing his damage, cooldowns, and allowing his passive to apply to himself as well. But for the most part, he was getting there in terms of balance at this point, and after all these buffs, he was actually nerfed a little bit in the coming patches after this. But it took a hell of a lot to get him to the point where he needed nerfs considering his initial release date. Alright, so that's Release Cabrakan. Let me know your thoughts on him, and if you were around at the time of his release. I know I was, and I was basically a Cabrakan siege main at this point, memeing on people with the worst god in the game. Of course with Polynomicon and Soul Reaver full damage builds. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, then be sure to drop a like before you leave, it really helps out the channel. Subscribe to help us get to that 20k mark, and have a great day. Peace out, you nerds.